Drool.
Drool.
The dog was drooling at the mouth.
He was drooling over a Porsche. Droop.
Droop.
The plant needs some water. It's starting to droop.
His eyelids began to droop. Jessie drooped her head.
Our spirits drooped as we faced the long trip home.
A droopy moustache.
Drop.
Drop.
He dropped his briefcase on a chair.
She screamed and dropped the torch.
U.S. planes began dropping bombs on the city. Supplies are being dropped for the refugees.
The apples are beginning to drop from the trees.
Your button has dropped off. He dropped down onto the floor and hid under the table. He dropped down onto the floor and hid under the table. She dropped her head back against the cushion. The number of deaths on the roads has dropped sharply. Temperatures drop quite dramatically at night, so bring some warm clothing.
Their share of the market dropped to 50% this year.
You might be able to get them to drop the price.
As soon as she saw the police car, she dropped her speed.
His name was dropped from the list. Taylor was bitterly disappointed to be dropped from the England side. Taylor was bitterly disappointed to be dropped from the England side. The proposal was dropped after opposition from civil liberties groups.
New evidence was presented to the court and the case was dropped.
Students are allowed to drop history in Year 9.
You can't expect me to drop everything whenever you're in town.
Oh, drop the senator. Just call me Gordon.
Sometime later, the matter was quietly dropped.
To her relief, Julius dropped the subject.
Just drop it, will you? I don't want to talk about it anymore.
What about the money? We've agreed to let it drop.
Just drop me here. I can walk the rest of the way. Just drop me here. I can walk the rest of the way.
She dropped Johnny at the school gates at about 8:30.
I've got your books. I'll drop them round to your place later.
I just dropped by to see how you were getting on.
The kids drop round and see her from time to time.
Jan dropped into the office this morning to tell me her news.
Why don't you drop in for a drink one evening?
The cliff dropped down over 100 feet to the sea below.
On the left, the ground drops away, giving a view over the rooftops. On the left, the ground drops away, giving a view over the rooftops.
She dropped him as soon as she found out he'd been seeing another woman.
We're going to shop till we drop.
He dropped some big hints about what he wanted for his birthday. Drop us a line to let us know how you're getting on.
Ben looked at me in horror for a moment, and then dropped his gaze. Ben looked at me in horror for a moment, and then dropped his gaze.
They waited for the wind to drop.
Finally, she dropped the bombshell. She was pregnant, and I was the father.
You told her where we went on Friday night? You've really dropped me in it now. You told her where we went on Friday night? You've really dropped me in it now.
Phil dropped $200 playing poker yesterday.
Real Madrid dropped a point at home yesterday.
He started out with the leaders, but at the first fence he dropped back.
Ellen dropped behind to tie her shoelace.
She kept dropping off at her desk.
I must have dropped off to sleep.
I'll drop you off on my way home. The number of graduates going into teaching has dropped off sharply.
The group gets smaller as members move away or drop out. Bill dropped out of college after his first year.
In the 60s, Leary urged kids to turn on, tune in, and drop out. In the 60s, Leary urged kids to turn on, tune in, and drop out.
As the first drops of rain began to fall, Michael started to run.
A single drop of blood splashed onto the floor. A drop of sweat ran down her forehead and into her eye.
She likes to add a drop of brandy to her tea.
George hasn't touched a drop for years.
I haven't got a drop of sympathy for him.
Manufacturers report a big drop in new orders.
A drop in temperature.
The result showed a sharp drop in profits.
There was a steep drop on one side of the track.
A 20-metre drop.
There was an almost sheer drop to the valley below.
Some of these corporations threatened to sue at the drop of a hat.
Airdrops of food aid were made to the region yesterday.
My first drop of the day is usually somewhere in North London.
5,000 new schools are to be built, but this is just a drop in the ocean for such a vast country.
Drop cloth.
Drop cloth.
Drop dead date.
Drop dead date.
Drop dead gorgeous.
Drop dead gorgeous.
Drop down menu. Drop down menu.
Drop goal.
Drop goal.
Drop in.
Drop in.
A drop-in advice centre.
Drop kick.
Drop kick.
Droplet.
Droplet.
Tiny droplets of water.
Drop out.
Drop out.
A high school dropout.
Dropper.
Dropper.
Droppings.
Droppings.
Drop shot.
Drop shot.
Dross.
Dross.
Most of the poems were pretentious dross.
Gold with impurities or dross. Drought.
Drought.
Drove.
Drove.
Tourists come in droves to see the White House.
A drove of cattle.
Drover.
Drover.
Drown.
Drown.
Many people drowned when the boat overturned.
Jane was drowned in the river.
Depressed, Peter tried to drown himself.
A train blew its whistle and drowned his voice. The noise of the battle was drowned out by his aircraft's engine.
The fish was drowned in a rich sauce.
Relief agencies are drowning in frustration.
The country is drowning in debt.
Drowse.
Drowse.
I was drowsing in front of the television when you called.
Drowsy.
Drowsy.
The drug can make you drowsy.
A drowsy summer afternoon.
Drubbing.
Drubbing.
Ireland gave England a drubbing at Twickenham.
Drudge.
Drudge.
Drudgery.
Drudgery.
Drug.
Drug.
A lot of young people start taking drugs at school.
She always looks as though she's on drugs.
Jimi Hendrix died of a drug overdose.
A drug used in the treatment of cancer. New drugs for AIDS-related conditions. New drugs for AIDS-related conditions.
Drugs prescribed by doctors can be extremely hazardous if used in the wrong way.
The big drug companies make huge profits. She was banned from the Olympics after failing a drug test.
Athletics is like a drug. It keeps dragging you back for more.
Johnson drugged and attacked 4 women.
There was no evidence that the horse had been drugged.
The wine had been drugged.
She was in pain despite being drugged up to the eyeballs.
Drug addict.
Drug addict.
Drug baron.
Drug baron.
Drug czar.
Drug czar.
Drug dealer.
Drug dealer.
Drug driving.
Drug driving.
Drugget.
Drugget.
Druggy.
Druggy.
Druggist.
Druggist.
Drug rehabilitation.
Drug rehabilitation.
Drug rehabilitation. Drug runner.
Drug runner.
Drugstore.
Drugstore.
Druid.
Druid.
Drum.
Drum.
A big bass drum.
1,000 people marched, beating drums and carrying flags. Trumpeter Red Rodney was playing with Kenny Clark on drums. Trumpeter Red Rodney was playing with Kenny Clark on drums.
Jones played the drums in an all-girl band.
A 5-gallon oil drum.
A brake drum.
The company is banging the drum for their new software.
The drum of the rain on the window.
I could hear the rain drumming against the windows.
Lisa drummed her fingers impatiently on the table.
An information booklet will be available and press advertisements will drum home the message. An information booklet will be available and press advertisements will drum home the message.
Don't talk to strangers is a message drummed into children. Don't talk to strangers is a message drummed into children.
He was drummed out of the army.
He traveled throughout Latin America, drumming up support for the Confederation.
The organization is using the event to drum up business.
Drumbeat.
Drumbeat.
Drum kit.
Drum kit.
Drum machine.
Drum machine.
Drum major.
Drum major.
Drum majorette.
Drum majorette.
Drummer.
Drummer.
Drumming.
Drumming.
The drumming of the horse's hooves.
Drum and bass.
Drum and bass.
Drum roll.
Drum roll.
Drunk.
Drunk.
Drumstick.
Drumstick.
Drunk.
Drunk.
You're drunk. David would get drunk, and I would have to take him home and put him to bed.
He was drunk on beer and whiskey. All she wants to do is get blind drunk.
He turned up one morning, drunk as a lord.
Drunk with happiness.
Drunk driving. Drunk driving.
Drunken.
Drunken.
He was a drunken bully.
She was lying in a drunken stupor on the sidewalk. She was lying in a drunken stupor on the sidewalk.
Tom got into a drunken brawl in a bar.
Drunk tank.
Drunk tank.
Dry.
Dry.
I need to change into some dry clothes.
Make sure that the surface is clean and dry before you start to paint.
You should store discs in a cool, dry place.
Jean rubbed her hair dry.
The path is dry as a bone.
The weather was hot and dry. Eastern areas should stay dry tomorrow.
The dry season.
These plants do not grow well in dry conditions. A prolonged dry spell. A prolonged dry spell. His heart was pounding and his mouth was dry.
Mary has dry, sensitive skin.
A shampoo for dry hair.
She licked her dry lips.
The river ran dry last summer.
He had a delightfully dry sense of humour.
In schools, science is often presented in a dry and uninteresting manner. A dry debate on policies.
A glass of dry white wine.
Paula had been dry for a year before she started drinking again. Paula had been dry for a year before she started drinking again.
Kuwait's a dry country.
Good evening, gentlemen, he said in a dry voice.
Mrs. Brown hung the washing on the line to dry. Mrs. Brown hung the washing on the line to dry.
He was drying his hair with a towel. He was drying his hair with a towel. He was drying his hair with a towel. Mary dried her hands. Leave the first coat of paint to dry before adding another. She stood up and dried her eyes. He quickly dried himself on the thin towel.
You wash and I'll dry. Shall I dry up these glasses?
We swam in the sea, then stretched out on the sand to dry off. We swam in the sea, then stretched out on the sand to dry off.
He dried the camera off, hoping it would still work.
In summer, water the plants regularly and never let the soil dry out. The kitchen was flooded and it took ages to dry it out.
He's been drying out at a private clinic.
The hospital dried Michael out and sent him home.
Foreign investment may dry up.
The work soon dried up.
Across Central and West Texas, water holes and wells have dried up. Across Central and West Texas, Water holes and wells have dried up.
Taking too much water for household use is drying up the river. Taking too much water for household use is drying up the river.
It was... She dried up again. Everyone became embarrassed and conversation dried up.
I'll just dry up these mugs and we can have a coffee.
Dryad.
Dryad.
Dry battery.
Dry battery.
Dry cell.
Dry cell.
Dry clean.
Dry clean.
Dry cleaners.
Dry cleaners.
Dry dock.
Dry dock.
Dryer.
Dryer.
Dry-eyed.
Dry-eyed.
Dry goods.
Dry goods.
A dry goods store.
Dry ice.
Dry ice.
Dry land.
Dry land.
Dryly.
Dryly.
I hear you're a hero, Philip said dryly.
Dry roasted.
Dry roasted.
Dry rot.
Dry rot.
Dry run.
Dry run.
Both the parties are treating the local elections as a dry run.
Dry shod.
Dry shod.
Dry stone wall.
Dry stone wall.
Dry wall.
Dry wall.
DSL.
DSL.
DTI.
DTI.
DTP.
DTP.
DTs.
DTs.
Dual.
Dual.
The bridge has a dual role, carrying both road and rail.
A dual system of education. She has dual nationality of Canada and Britain.
Dual band.
Dual band.
Dual carriageway.
Dual carriageway.
Dual core.
Dual core.
Dual heritage.
Dual heritage.
Dualism.
Dualism.
Dub.
Dub.
The body, thousands of years old, was found in the Alps and dubbed the Iceman. The body, thousands of years old, was found in the Alps and dubbed the Iceman.
A British film dubbed into French. A British film dubbed into French.
Dubious.
Dubious.
The firm was accused of dubious accounting practices. The firm was accused of dubious accounting practices.
Many critics regard this argument as dubious or, at best, misleading.
The assumption that growth in one country benefits the whole world is highly dubious.
I can see you are dubious. Take some time to think about it.
Some universities are dubious about accepting students over the age of 30.
Are you sure you know what you are doing? Andy said, looking dubious.
The Stevensons had the dubious honor of being the 100th family to lose their home in the fire. The Stevensons had the dubious honor of being the 100th family to lose their home in the fire.
The room was decorated in dubious taste.
Dubstep.
Dubstep. Ducal.
Ducal.
Ducat.
Ducat.
Duchess.
Duchess.
The Duchess of York.
Duchy.
Duchy.
Duck.
Roast duck with orange sauce.
She took to dancing like a duck to water.
What can I get you, ducks?
If she hadn't ducked, the ball would have hit her. Jamie saw his father coming and ducked quickly behind the wall.
Tim ducked down to comb his hair in the mirror.
She ducked her head to look more closely at the inscription.
The two men ducked into a block of flats and disappeared.
She ducked out of the door before he could stop her. Wait a minute, he called, ducking back inside.
The ruling body wanted to duck the issue of whether players had been cheating.
Glazer ducked a question about his involvement in the bank scandal.
Tom grabbed him from behind to duck him under the surface.
I always ducked out of history lessons at school.
Duck-billed platypus.
Duck-billed platypus.
Duckboards.
Duckboards.
Ducking stool.
Ducking stool.
Duckling.
Duckling.
Ducks and drakes.
Ducks and drakes.
Duckweed.
Duckweed.
Ducky.
Ducky.
Well, that's just ducky.
Duct.
Duct.
Air is heated and then circulated through large ducts to all parts of the house.
A tear duct.
Ductile.
Ductile.
Ducting.
Ducting.
Dud.
Dud.
Several of the fireworks were duds.
A dud light bulb.
Dude.
Dude.
A real cool dude.
Dude ranch.
Dude ranch.
Dudgeon.
Dudgeon.
Dew.
Dew.
The team are due to fly to Italy next month. The team are due to fly to Italy next month.
His new book is due to be published next year.
She's pregnant and the baby's due in April. The final results of the experiment are due on December 9th.
I'm due at his office at 4:30.
The car is due for its annual service again.
When are the library books due back?
Any money due you will be sent by cheque through the post.
Thanks are due to all those who took part.
The next income tax payment is due on the 31st of January. The next income tax payment is due on the 31st of January.
Further details will be announced in due course.
He was banned for 6 months for driving without due care and attention.
We want the best for each individual child with due regard for the interests of the other children.
Dad, with all due respect, was not a very good husband.
He accepted all the praise he received as his due. He accepted all the praise he received as his due.
Freddie, to give him his due, always tried to be honest. Freddie, to give him his due, always tried to be honest.
Robert failed to pay his dues last year. Due date.
Due date. Fewer than 5% of women have their babies on their due date.
Duel.
Duel.
The officer challenged him to a duel.
A verbal duel.
Due process.
Due process.
Duet.
Duet.
Due to.
Due to.
The Court of Inquiry ruled that the crash was due to pilot error. The Court of Inquiry ruled that the crash was due to pilot error. The Court of Inquiry ruled that the crash was due to pilot error. She has been absent from work due to illness.
The restaurant's success was due largely to its new manager. Attendance at the meeting was small, due in part to the absence of teachers.
Duff.
Duff.
Get off your duff and help me.
Duffel bag.
Duffel bag.
Duffel coat.
Duffel coat.
Duffer.
Duffer.
Dug.
Dug.
Dugout.
Dugout.
A dugout canoe.
Duh.
Duh.
DUI.
There were a large number of DUI arrests on New Year's Eve.
Du jour. Du jour. Alien invasions are the cinematic theme du jour.
Duke.
Duke.
The Duke of Norfolk.
Dukedom.
Dukedom.
Dulcet.
Dulcet.
Basil's dulcet tones could be heard in the corridor.
Dulcimer.
Dulcimer.
Dull.
Dull.
Life is never dull when Elizabeth is here.
A dull movie.
It sounded pretty dull to me.
The weekly meeting tends to be deadly dull.
Last week we had a hurricane. Never a dull moment running a hotel in the Caribbean.
The bird is dull brown and grey in colour.
Her eyes were dull with dark shadows beneath them.
The dull afternoon light.
Outside the weather was hazy and dull.
A dull sky.
A dull ache in her lower back.
The pain was dull but persistent.
The gate shut with a dull thud.
If you don't understand, then you're duller than I thought. Well, Michael, he said dully. Her stomach ached dully. He drank some alcohol to dull the pain.
Her fear and anxiety dulled her mind.
His eyes dulled a little. The constant rain dulled all sound.
Dullard.
Dullard.
Duly.
Duly.
Here are your travel documents, all duly signed.
The Queen duly appeared on the balcony to wave to the crowds.
Dumb.
Dumb.
What a dumb question.
A bunch of dumb kids.
What is it? I asked, playing dumb.
She's no dumb blonde.
He stared at the burnt-out car in dumb disbelief. She was struck dumb with terror. It was just dumb luck that we found the place at all.
For a few seconds she gazed dumbly at him. For a few seconds she gazed dumbly at him.
Have history textbooks been dumbed down over the past decade?
Dumbbell.
Dumbbell.
Dumbfounded.
Dumbfounded.
He was completely dumbfounded by the incident.
Dumbo.
Dumbo. Dumb show.
Dumb show.
Dumbstruck.
Dumbstruck.
Dumb waiter.
Dumb waiter.
Dum-dum.
Dum-dum.
Dummy.
Dummy.
A shop window dummy.
A tailor's dummy.
During practice runs, the warheads in the missiles will be dummies.
A ventriloquist dummy. A ventriloquist dummy. A ventriloquist dummy.
No, you dummy. The other hand.
A dummy rifle.
Dummy run.
Dummy run.
Do a dummy run to see how long it will take.
Dump.
Dump.
Meryl dumped her suitcase down in the hall.
They dump tons of salt on icy road surfaces to make driving safer.
He found a can of beef stew and dumped it in a saucepan to heat. He found a can of beef stew and dumped it in a saucepan to heat. He found a can of beef stew and dumped it in a saucepan to heat.
Ellie dumped all the photos of her ex-husband.
He dumped her body into the sea.
Britain dumps more of its waste than any other European country. Vicky dumped Neil yesterday. A campaign to stop cheap European beef being dumped in West Africa.
Don't just dump the extra work on me.
Politicians dumping on their opponents.
We all dump our troubles on Mike. We all dump our troubles on Mike. The fire probably started in a rubbish dump. Put the rest into a sack to take to the dump. An underground nuclear waste dump.
A dump site.
There's been a series of explosions in an ammunition dump.
What a dump, she added as they entered the village.
Why are you living in a dump like this?
She's feeling a bit down in the dumps. She's feeling a bit down in the dumps.
A screen dump.
Dumper truck.
Dumper truck.
Dumping.
Dumping.
The government has promised to stop dumping by the state-owned chemical plants.
Dumping ground.
Dumping ground.
Rivers have always been a dumping ground for man's unwanted waste. Rivers have always been a dumping ground for man's unwanted waste.
The prison has been the dumping ground for difficult prisoners for years.
Dumpling.
Dumpling.
Chicken and dumplings.
Apple dumplings.
Dumpster.
Dumpster.
Dumpster diving.
Dumpster diving.
Dump truck.
Dump truck.
Dumpy.
Dumpy.
A dumpy little man.